The hall smelled of roasted meat and arrogance. King's Landing always had a stench, but in the great hall it was masked by perfume, sweat, and the sour breath of power. Sansa sat at the long table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the golden goblets in front of her. The Lannisters had fed her, clothed her, and caged her like a bird. Every smile she gave them was practiced, every bow of her head rehearsed, and across from her sat Joffrey, her betrothed, her king, her tormentor. The mad prince was laughing. It wasn't the laugh of a boy, not really. It was too sharp, too cruel. He was pointing to the head of a minstrel who had displeased him earlier in the day, now mounted like a trophy on the wall. People laughed along, but their eyes didn't. They laughed because they had to. Sansa's hands trembled under the table. She remembered her father's head on the spike. She remembered her mother's voice warning her, "You must play their game if you wish to survive." But there was no game left to play. The days had bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and the girl from Winterfell was gone. In her place was someone colder, someone who understood that there was no mercy here. "Pour for me, little dove," Joffrey commanded, his voice thick with wine and pride. She reached for the jug. Her fingers brushed the hilt of the knife by the bread platter, small, sharp, nothing like the swords of the Kingsguard. Her mind was loud now, filled with her mother's face, her father's last moments, Rob's letters that never came. As she poured, Joffrey kept speaking, louder so everyone could hear. "Your northern manners are slow. Perhaps I should have the hound teach you speed. He's good at breaking things." The hall laughed again. The jug was almost empty. Her other hand slid the knife under the edge of the table. She didn't feel the weight of it. She felt the weight of Winterfell, of the North, of every cruel word and slap Joffrey had given her. She leaned close as she filled his goblet. "My king," she whispered. He smirked, eyes half-lidded. "Yes, little dove." The knife moved before her mind caught up. It slipped under his ribs, quick, quiet, almost delicate. The smirk froze on his face. For a heartbeat, no one noticed. His hand went to her wrist in shock, but the knife twisted, and he gasped. The goblet clattered to the floor. The first scream wasn't his. It came from a courtier who saw the blood spill onto the table. Then chaos erupted. The Kingsguard surged forward. Cersei's voice cut through the noise, shrill and breaking all at once. "My son." Joffrey was choking now, his hands clawing at her, at the air, at life itself. Sansa stepped back, the knife still in her hand. She didn't run. She couldn't. They slammed her to the ground. A boot pressed into her back. Someone yanked her, head up by the hair so she could see Joffrey collapse onto the table, eyes wide, mouth open. A child who finally realized death didn't care for crowns. The hall was a storm. People were shouting, pushing, crying. The guards dragged her up, her knees scraping the stone. Cersei was on the floor beside Joffrey, her hands bloody as she tried to hold him together. She looked up at Sansa, not with confusion, not with disbelief, but with the cold, pure hatred of a lioness whose cub had been stolen. "You will beg for death," Cersei hissed. Sansa didn't answer. She couldn't. The knife was gone, her wrists bound, but inside there was a strange quiet. The fear that had ruled her for so long was gone, burned away by what she had done. They dragged her from the hall. Somewhere behind her, a herald was already shouting for the gates to be closed, for the city to be locked down. She was no longer the little dove of the court. She was the wolf who had killed the king. And wolves didn't beg. The cell was cold and full of water that had nowhere to go. It gathered along the edge of the stone and crept into her slippers. Sansa sat with her back against the wall and counted her breaths. She tried not to hear the sounds above her, sudden running feet, the clang of gates, the bells that rang too fast and then slowed, like a heartbeat that had lost its rhythm. Somewhere far away, a woman sobbed like a kettle left on the fire. Somewhere closer, a man laughed the way a man laughs when he is afraid, and wants to bully his fear into silence. They had thrown her in without a word. A jailer had taken her hair ribbon as if it mattered, and another had joked that wolves didn't need ribbons. They left her with a tin cup, a crust of bread too hard for her teeth, and the memory of Joffrey's face when he understood the knife was real. She thought of that moment the way you think of a nightmare from which you cannot wake, the eyes wide, the lips still trying to shape a command that no one could obey anymore. The door scraped. Light knifed in. Tyrion Lannister stood there with 2 guards behind him. He looked smaller in the doorway, a child's height wrapped around a man's gaze. He stepped into the stink and shut the door in the guards' faces. "So," he said, "simply, you did it." Sansa pressed her palms to the damp floor. "I did. Many have wanted to," he said softly. "Few have dared. Fewer still have succeeded." He came closer, careful not to let his boots touch the dirty water. "Do you understand what comes next?" "They will kill me," she said, and heard. How calm she sounded. "They will try," he said, and tilted his head. "But even grief needs a stage. Cersei will demand a show. There will be a trial. They will dress you in clean clothes and call you names on silk banners. They will taste justice like sweet wine and spit it out as soon as they're drunk on it." "Will you speak for me?" she asked, though she didn't know why she wanted him to. He had been kind in a place that fed on cruelty, and maybe that was enough. Tyrion's mouth twisted. "If I speak for you, I burn. If I speak against you, I rot. I will speak the truth where it can be heard, which is in very few places." He lowered his voice. "Listen to me. There are people who will want you dead because they loved him. There are more who will want you dead because they fear what your knife has made possible." She frowned. "What has it made possible?" "Choice," he said. "Tommen is a sweet boy. He is also a door with many keys. Tywin will want one. The Tyrells another. Your act has turned a crown into a prize. Prizes invite hunters." The door rattled. A guard's voice. "Time's up, imp." Tyrion held her eyes, another heartbeat. If there is any mercy left in this city, look for it in strange places. Varys can make doors where there are only walls. The Hound can smell blood from a lie. Littlefinger, well, he can turn your fear into a ladder. If he appears, climb. Carefully, and if you see me again, try to look as if I disgust you. It may save your life. He knocked twice. The door opened. He paused on the threshold and added, almost gently, "You were not wrong, Sansa. But right and alive are rarely the same here." When he left, the cell felt smaller. The bells had stopped. In their place rose the cry of a crowd. It swelled and dipped like the sea striking rocks. Names rolled through it. King Tommen. Then another, sharper, cutting Quinslayer. The word pierced the floor and found her spine. She closed her eyes and pictured Winterfell's godswood, the faces in the trees, and the snow that quieted everything it touched. She pretended the water at her feet was melted snow, not filth. The trial came at dusk. They washed her, dressed her in pale blue that made her look younger, and pulled her hair tight. The hall had been scrubbed, but it still smelled like iron. Joffrey lay under a golden cloth, a small, still mountain. Cersei sat rigid as a blade beside him. Her eyes were red, her mouth a wound that kept trying to close and could not. Was there too, bewildered and blinking, a boy in a storm too big for him? The small council lined the dais like a row of knives. Grand Maester Pycelle sniffed and muttered. Mace Tyrell looked worried and hungry at once. Varys watched everything, with eyes that never seemed to blink. Littlefinger was not in sight, but Sansa felt him anyway, like a cold hand on the back of her neck. A herald read the charge. Regicide, treason, murder most foul. The words echoed, people muttered. Someone threw a flower that missed and hit the floor like a tiny surrender. They asked her to speak. Sansa lifted her chin. I killed him, she said. The room sucked in a breath. I killed him because he killed my father, and because he made sport of pain, and because he thought a crown was a license to be cruel. Cersei stood so fast, her chair slammed back. He was your king. He was a boy who wanted to see people bleed, Sansa said. Her voice shook, but she held it steady, and I was the only one close enough to make it stop. The hall broke into noise. Some shouted for her head. A few voices, thin as threads, called for mercy. Tommen stared at her with wet eyes, as if he were looking at a monster and at his sister at the same time. Silence, said Tywin Lannister, who had entered without her noticing, and now seemed to fill the world. His presence sat on the room like a great weight. There will be order. He looked at Sansa as one might look at a horse for teeth. You confess freely. You name your grievance. Justice is not vengeance. Yet a king is dead. He drew a breath. The law is clear. The sentence for regicide is death. Cersei's mouth curved, vicious and grateful. The crowd roared approval, eager for the next scene in their play. Tywin raised a hand and the sound fell. But the crown must also be wise. We cannot let the North say we butchered a girl out of blind fury. We cannot make a martyr when we need a warning. He turned to the hall. The sentence is death-stayed. She will be held until the coronation of King Tommen, where the new king shall pronounce the final judgment. Let the realm see that even in grief we are measured. Sansa understood what he had done. He had turned her into a rope in his hand, something to tug when he needed a hush. She was not a person anymore. She was a message. They took her back before the crowd could touch her. As the guards led her down the corridor, a shape peeled out of the shadows. The Hound, Sandor Clegane, leaned against a pillar, his burned face half in torchlight. His eyes were tired and too sharp. You've got teeth, after all. Little bird, he said. I am not a bird, she whispered. He grunted. No, not any more. He glanced past the guards as if they were furniture. If you want to live, keep your ears open and your mouth shut, and don't drink anything someone smiles to give you. The guards moved her on, but his words clung to her like the smell of smoke. In her cell, the dark came quick. Rats whispered in the straw. She pressed her hand to the wall and found a crack wide enough to fit a finger. Cold air bled through. She leaned her cheek to the stone and heard a faint tapping, irregular, then quiet. After a while it came again, distinct. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. A pattern. She knocked back the same way, heart racing. The reply shifted. 1 long, 1 short. A child's game turned into a secret door. The next morning, a hooded figure came with the food. He moved strangely, silently. When the door closed, He lifted his head. Varys, smooth as unbroken water, smiled without warmth and set the bowl down. "Walls have ears," he whispered. "Tonight, when the bells toll for vespers, press that crack and the stone will wobble. A mousehole becomes a tunnel if you know where to push. If you wish to leave, be ready." "Why help me?" she asked. "Because kings die," he said, "and so do queens. But stories live, and I prefer mine without lions at the end." His eyes softened. "And because you did a terrible thing for a reason that was not small." He went as softly as he came. Sansa stared at the bowl until the water stilled and showed her a face she barely knew. The city above raged and arranged itself, and the bells waited somewhere with their iron tongues. All she had to do was choose. Stay and be judged by a boy who would learn to wear a man's voice, or run into a world that had already named her. Monster and martyr both. When the sun slid down the wall and the first bell began to swing, she put her fingers to the stone and felt it breathe. The stone moved with a groan that was quieter than her heartbeat. Sansa slipped her hand into the gap and felt the cold edges scrape her knuckles. It shifted again under her push, and a breath of stale air slid into the cell. Beyond was darkness, thick and close, smelling of damp wood and dust that had not seen light in years. She hesitated. One step here meant no step back. Staying meant the trial, the coronation, Tywin's leash around her throat. Leaving meant what? She had no map, no allies she could trust, only a promise from a man who called himself the Spider. She took the crust of bread, the thin tin cup, and nothing else. She pushed her shoulder through, twisting until she could slide into the narrow gap. The stone sealed behind her with a soft thud, cutting off even the dim light from the cell. The passage was low, the floor gritty under her slippers. She had to crawl, her knees scraping on old rock. The smell of mildew was everywhere, thick enough to taste. A sound reached her, faint, slow drops of water, far away. Counting time in a place where time didn't matter. She kept going until her arms ached. The tunnel bent left, then down. Once she thought she heard footsteps behind her, but when she stopped, there was only her own ragged breath. Finally, a sliver of yellow light appeared ahead. She moved toward it, faster now, the stone biting her palms. The opening was a wooden hatch with rusted hinges. She pressed her ear to it, voices low and quick. Men talking about coin, one laughing about a ship leaving on the tide. She waited until the voices faded, then lifted the hatch just enough to look. She was in some kind of storeroom, sacks of grain piled high, the smell of salt and rope everywhere. Lantern light swayed from a hook, and in the far corner, a door stood open to the night. She pulled herself out and crept to the door. Outside was the dock, the water black under the moon. Ships loomed like shadows, sails furled, ropes creaking. A handful of dock workers moved barrels under torchlight, and then, as if he had been waiting for her, Littlefinger stepped out from behind a stack of crates. His smile was small, tight, as though even he wasn't sure if he liked this game yet. "My little wolf," he said quietly, "you've made quite the mess." Sansa froze. "Are you here for me?" "I'm here for opportunity," he said, glancing around as if measuring who was close enough to hear. "Joffrey's death has left a hole, and holes are where I plant seeds. You, Sansa, are one of the rarest seeds I've ever seen. A Stark who's killed a king. I didn't." She started, then stopped. There was no point denying it. Whether you meant to or not, he said. You've stepped into a story the realm will tell for 100 years. That makes you valuable to some, and dangerous to others. I happen to be both. She looked toward the water. Are you going to turn me in? He chuckled, soft and sharp. Not tonight. I have a ship. It leaves before dawn. But I won't take you for free, Sansa. When you reach where I'm taking you, you'll owe me, and debts to me are not easily paid. She wanted to say no, to run, to find her own way, but there was nowhere to run to. The gates were locked. The city was a nest of knives, and somewhere in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister was likely already sharpening the one meant for her. Where would you take me? She asked. Somewhere the lions cannot reach, he said. Yet she hesitated only a moment before nodding. His hand closed around her arm, not cruelly but firmly, and he led her toward the ship. The night air was sharp, the water restless. She felt eyes on her from shadows, from corners, from the black mouths of alleys, but no one stopped them. When they reached the ship, a hood was pulled over her head. She smelled tar, heard the slap of waves on the hull. Somewhere behind her, footsteps followed. Someone heavy, deliberate. She turned her head and caught a voice, low and rough. Thought you'd leave without me, little bird. The hound. Littlefinger's voice was smooth. Sandor, we have no need for your wrong, the hound cut in. If she's running, she'll need more than your pretty lies to keep her alive. The plank thudded under their steps. Ropes creaked, sails groaned, and the ship began to shift. Sansa didn't know if she was sailing toward safety or into another cage, only that the city was shrinking behind her, and somewhere in its heart, Joffrey Baratheon lay cold and still. She whispered to herself, wolves don't beg, and the ship carried her into the dark, far enough from the city that the torches on the walls looked like a necklace dropped in the water. Wind pushed at Sansa's hair and salted her tongue. Men moved around her with the loose rhythm of sailors who knew when to pull, when to let the ropes sing, when to curse, when to grin. Littlefinger stood near the stern with the captain, speaking in a voice meant to be private and just loud enough that she could hear the shape of the words: tides, fees, a safer cove if the weather turned foul. The hound crouched by a coil of rope like a great animal, deciding whether to sleep or bite. When the captain left them, Littlefinger turned with his small, composed smile. To the Vale, he said, as if she had already asked, where soft mountains keep hard secrets, and old friends forget old insults if you give them something new to hold. My Aunt Lysa, Sansa said, remembering a woman she barely knew, a face from childhood stories that always seemed to end with tears or arguments. Will she help me? She will help me, Littlefinger said, pleasant as tea, which means for a time she will help you. The hound snorted. And when you want something else, what then? Then I will want something else, Littlefinger said, hands spread as if offering candied almonds. We can't all be simple men, Sandor. The deck pitched. Sansa held to the rail and watched King's Landing shrink into the grey belly of night. The wind was cold enough to make her teeth hurt. She wished for a cloak, and the wish must have touched the air because a heavy weight settled over her shoulders. The hound didn't look at her when he did it. He stared past the bow as if daring the sea to try him. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he muttered. I'm keeping my cloak warm. The first hours blurred into rope and creak and the slap of waves that never learned to stop. Littlefinger fed her well, because he liked people fed when he was selling them things, safety plans, himself, salt, fish, a heel of bread that still remembered the oven. A tin cup of something hot that tasted like herbs and winter stories. He asked nothing important until the stars were bright. What did it feel like? He asked softly, when the knife went in. The question hit her harder than the wind. The hound's head came up like a dog hearing a twig break in the woods. Sansa gripped the rail and worked the words loose, one at a time. It felt, she said, like the world got quiet, and I could finally hear what I wanted. Littlefinger's eyes warmed. Good. I prefer people who know what they want. They're easier to steer. Try steering me and I'll break your fingers, the hound said, not moving. Littlefinger's smile didn't change, I'm sure. You'll try. They didn't sleep much. The sea didn't allow it. Sansa's dreams were stabs of light and corridors that led nowhere. When dawn finally unfolded in a pale, broken line, the captain brought news with his breakfast, a lantern signal from a fishing skiff that had come to close out of curiosity and profit. King Joffrey is dead, the captain recited, as if they didn't know. Tommen named king before sunrise by the High Septon. Tywin Lannister rules as Hand and Regent. Bounty for the wolf girl who killed the king dead. A pouch of gold. Alive, a chest. Cersei, Littlefinger said, sipping, and not blinking. She prefers her warnings heavy enough to bruise. Sansa's stomach flipped. The deck seemed to roll twice. They'll hunt me, they already are, the hound said. Every sharp boy with a dull knife thinks he can buy a lord's smile with your head, which means we must be ahead. Of their sharp boys and their dull knives, Littlefinger said, we will not take the main harbour at Gulltown, too many eyes. There's a cove I know where the rocks keep secrets and the fishermen keep their mouths shut because they like their boats unburned. He moved away before she could answer, already speaking to the captain again, already drawing lines in the air that turned into roots and bribes and saved lives. The hound stayed. He watched her face like a soldier watching the weather. You think you're a monster now, he said, blunt as the rail. You're not. Monsters take pleasure. You took a choice. I remember his face, she whispered. It comes when I close my eyes. It'll keep coming, he said. You learn to keep your eyes open. The day went long and grey. Twice they saw sails on the horizon and shifted course behind a bank of mist. Once a gull landed on the rail near Sansa and looked at her as if she had something to say to it. She had nothing to say to a bird. She had too much to say to the dead and to the living who were making plans around her like walls. Near dusk, Littlefinger brought parchment. A letter, he said, for your aunt. In your hand, Sansa stared at the blank page. What do I write? That you're alive, he said. That you beg her protection. That you will be a dutiful niece and a silent guest. That you will make my presence there appear natural. Say that the city is not safe for you and that wolves need mountains when the world grows loud. She took the quill. Her hand shook for the first line and then steadied. She wrote about fear without writing the word, about cold without mentioning chains. She signed it with a name that felt like a shadow, Sansa Stark, who has killed the king. She didn't write that part. She folded the page and sealed it with wax and little fingers, Smiling Bird and the North. She asked, does word reach Robb? Will he think less of me? Littlefinger made a sad face that didn't reach his eyes. The young wolf has his own storms. He will think whatever helps him win or keeps him from losing. What does that mean? It means, he said, that every man who swore him loyalty is counting how many winters he has left and how many suns he can trade for a pardoned name. Your act made him folk song and threat at once. Some will raise a cup to you, Some will. Raise a knife. Night fell a second time, and with it came rough weather. The ship pitched hard enough to make curses stick to every beam. Men tied themselves to their work. Sansa learned how to move with the Deckney's soft eyes on the mast, one hand always ready. A wave slapped her hard enough to make her gasp, and the hound's hand was on her arm before she could fall. He steadied her like she was a thing he wasn't sure he liked but wouldn't let break. When the worst passed, Littlefinger came back with a small chest and a private look. He opened it just enough for her to see a nest of little glass vials, a folded veil, and a ring with a needle. Hidden in the band. Tools, he murmured. For a girl who is not a child and will never again be a fool. Dye for your hair. A name for your mouth. A prick that will make a man sleep a long dream if he won't let you pass. The hound's lip curled. You'd arm her with tricks and send her into rooms where you wouldn't last a minute. I arm her with what she can carry, Littlefinger. Said, she isn't a knight, she's a story. Stories slip where swords cannot. Sansa closed the chest. I don't want to be your story, she said. He smiled as if she had paid him a compliment. Nobody does at the beginning. 3 nights later they slid into the cove. Littlefinger had promised, a bite in the coastline with black rocks like broken teeth. Lanterns flashed twice on a cliff and were answered from the deck. The captain wove the ship through a path only madmen or men paid by madmen would take. When the anchor dropped, the night swallowed the sound. Boats came without names. Men climbed like spiders. A wrapped package went up to the cliff, her letter to Lysa cradled like a baby and sent into the dark. Littlefinger's voice flowed among the rocks, buying silence by the yard. The hound kept a hand on his sword and his body, between Sansa and everything else. In the small hours they made shore, not at a harbour but at a slit of sand between two angry stones. The climb up was cruel. Cold grass cut her palms. At the top, dawn waited grey and thin. A cart sat on the road with a broken wheel, the universal sign that a wheelwright had once been here and would, for enough coin, be here again. The driver wore a cap that hid most of his face and a smile that hid nothing. For the mountain road, Littlefinger said, we'll go in as merchants with cheap wool and dear opinions. 2 days to a friendly tower. 2 more to a gate that hates strangers and loves me. He paused. His attention had slipped away for the first time, and Sansa saw the fox under the silk. He was listening to something no one else heard. A rumour on the wind. What is it? She asked Tywin, he said. He sent ravens north. He wants the Freys to host a feast. He wants a marriage patched with bread and salt and something sharp under the table. The twins, the hound growled. Stinks of trap. Everything. Stinks of trap, Littlefinger said, too quickly. Then he smoothed himself and was a man again. We must reach the Eyrie before the next song starts. The world is about to change again. Sansa looked south where the sea still tried to claim the land, and north where the mountains piled up like old bones. She pulled the hound's cloak tighter and stepped toward the cart. She did not know if the Freys would sharpen their knives or if the north would light its beacons. She did not know if Aunt Lysa's arms would be open or simply another set of bars. She only knew that the story she had started in the Great Hall was still writing her, letter by letter, and that she would have to learn to hold the quill. The cart smelled of wool, old apples, and damp wood. Sansa sat between the hound and a sack of fleece, the road jostling her spine with every rut. Littlefinger rode ahead on a thin bay horse, his back straight. his cloak clean despite the dust that clung to everyone else. The mountains grew as they moved north, their peaks cutting the sky into shards. The air sharpened with each mile, thinner and colder, and Sansa breathed it in like it was washing something out of her. She told herself that the Vale would be different, fewer whispers, fewer daggers behind smiles, but her hands still stayed close to the small chest Littlefinger had given her. She hadn't touched the ring or the vials yet, but she could feel them when the cart shifted, a quiet weight that reminded her she wasn't defenseless anymore. The Hound was watching her again, the way he did when he thought she wasn't looking. "You're too quiet, little bird," he said finally. "I'm thinking," she replied. "Thinking gets you in trouble." "It's already found me trouble," she said. He grunted, almost approving. The road wound upward, past villages that were no more than clusters of stone houses with thin smoke rising from their chimneys. The people stared at them from doorways, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Wolves and lions were just stories here, but every stranger was a possible thief. By the second night, they camped in a shallow clearing off the road. Littlefinger insisted they keep no fire. Light makes you easy to find, and they ate cold bread and dried meat under a sky heavy with stars. Sansa sat wrapped in the Hound's cloak, listening to the low murmur of Littlefinger and the driver talking about coin. She felt herself drifting when the sound of hooves jolted her awake. 5 riders appeared on the road, torches casting their faces in gold and shadow. They wore no livery, but their leader carried himself with the ease of someone used to being obeyed. He reined in when he saw the cart. "Evening," he called. "Traveling late, aren't you?" Littlefinger smiled from his saddle. "Merchants, bound for the Vale, wool for sale if the price is right." The man's eyes flicked to Sansa, and the girl. "She doesn't look like a merchant." The Hound's hand rested on his sword hilt. "She's not for sale." The leader smirked. "A shame. Heard there's a bounty for a girl fits that face." The words hung in the cold air. Sansa felt her stomach turn, but she kept her face still. "Bounties are for fools who don't know the worth of what they hold," Littlefinger said smoothly. "If I had her, and I don't, I'd keep her somewhere much safer than a roadside camp." The man's gaze lingered, testing him, then shifted to the Hound. The burned man's stare was flat, daring him. After a moment, the leader spat in the dirt. "Enjoy your night, merchant." He turned his horse, and the riders disappeared into the dark, the torchlight winking out one by one. Sansa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They knew," she whispered. "Maybe," Littlefinger said. "Or maybe they were just guessing to see if you'd flinch." "You didn't. That's good." The Hound didn't sit again until the sound of hooves was long gone. "Next time, I cut their throats before they start asking questions." They broke camp before dawn. The higher they climbed, the rougher the road became. Narrow passes where the wind roared between the cliffs. Switchbacks that made the cart creak like it would split in two. On the 3rd day, they reached the Bloody Gate, the great stone fortress that guarded the Vale. Armed men barred the road, but when Littlefinger showed his seal and whispered a name, the captain's face shifted from suspicion to something close. "To respect, Lord Baelish," he said. "We weren't told to expect you." "I wasn't told to expect trouble," Littlefinger replied lightly. "And yet, here we both are." The gate opened, and they rolled inside, for the first time. Since King's Landing, Sansa felt as if she had crossed into another world. The air was cleaner, the mountains wrapped the sky in a cold embrace, and beyond the pass lay the road that would take her to the Eyrie, But safety was still a word she didn't trust. That night, they stayed in a small guest house built into the side of the cliff. The Vale stretched below them like a map, rivers like silver threads, villages like tiny stones scattered in green fields. Sansa stood at the window until the Hound came up beside her. "You think this will be better?" he said quietly. "It won't, just different." She didn't answer. She wasn't ready to say it out loud, but she knew he was right. In the morning, Littlefinger came to her with a folded parchment. "News from the Riverlands," he said. "Your brother Robb is on his way to the twins for a wedding. The Freys are holding a feast in his honor." Her fingers tightened on the windowsill. "Is that good?" "Weddings can be good," Littlefinger said with a voice too smooth. "They can also be final." She turned to him. "You think it's a trap?" "I think," he said, "that the game you started in King's Landing hasn't finished playing you yet." The last stretch to the Eyrie felt like riding into the sky itself. The mountain steps were carved so thin in places that the cartwheels lifted on one side and made Sansa's stomach drop. Mules snorted, bells clinked, and the wind pressed cold fingers into every seam of her clothes. The Hound walked beside the cart with one hand on the wood to steady it, swearing softly at the mountain as if it could hear and take offense. Littlefinger rode ahead with a pair of Vale men who kept glancing back, trying to see through hood without seeming rude. They made the first Waycastle by noon and the second at dusk. Each one was a stone claw clinging to rock, with narrow beds, thin soup, and guards who had learned to be polite to weather and suspicious of people. At the third, Littlefinger took the small chest he had given Sansa and set it on a table by a wavering candle. "Now," he said gently, "we take the last steps as different people." He opened the lid. The vials gleamed like trapped moonlight. Sansa looked at the brown dye, the cheap comb, the plain veil. "Who am I, my daughter?" he said. "Elaine Stone, a quiet girl who listens more than she speaks. She does not stab kings. She does not make stories. She keeps me company and minds her aunt." "My Aunt Sansa asked, or yours?" He didn't smile. "Lysa loves who she loves, and she burns everything else. If she thinks you threaten what she wants, she'll open a hole in the floor and ask you to look down at the clouds." The moon door, Sansa had heard whispers of it even. In King's Landing, a hole where law and temper were the same thing, and both dropped you into the sky. "Why bring me here if I'm danger to her?" Sansa asked. "Because nowhere else is safer for you today," Littlefinger said. He glanced at the Hound. "For some of us safety is a ladder we build as we climb." The Hound folded his arms. "I don't like ladders." "Then mind your footing." Sansa dyed her hair as the candle burned low, working the stain through strand by strand until the copper went dull and brown. The water in the basin turned muddy. When she veiled herself and looked into the metal, a stranger stared back. Plainer, smaller, someone who might pass in a courtyard without being counted. "Elaine," she said softly, testing the shape of it. The name felt like a coat put on over wet clothes. It fit, but it didn't warm. By morning, they climbed the last and cruelest stretch, the mule path that switched back and forth until the mountains seemed to grow taller out of spite. The Eyrie rose clean and white ahead, impossible, like a palace, made of ice and stubbornness. When the final gate opened, the wind rushed through the courtyard and pulled at Sansa's veil as if it wanted to meet the face underneath. A woman waited for them on the steps. Lysa Arryn was smaller than Sansa remembered and sharper, Her eyes were bright with a fever that wasn't illness. She hurried down 3 steps and then stopped, seeing the hound, seeing Sansa, seeing Littlefinger, last and brightest, Petty. She breathed, and all the air in her seemed to pour into his name. She went to him first, hands to his face, tears already moving. "You came, of course I did," he said, warm as summer bread. "I bring you a blessing, my daughter Elaine." Lysa's gaze flicked to Sansa, up and down like a needle. "Your daughter?" She made the words work. "You never spoke of her. You never asked about the years when we were apart," he said smoothly. "Elaine, greet your aunt Sansa," curtsied, "my lady." Lysa's mouth softened, then tightened. Again. She looked to the hound with open distaste. "And this dog?" "My sworn man," Littlefinger said lightly. "He earned his keep on the road." "We have men," Lysa snapped. "We have rules. The Eyrie is not an inn for Lannister brutes." The hound looked at her as if he'd found something unpleasant on his boot. "I've no love for Lannisters, nor do I," Lysa said, eyes flaring, "and yet they seem to crawl under every door." "Very well, he can stay in the outer barracks." "He will not roam," the hound shrugged. "I don't roam, I stalk." "Charming," Lysa said, and was already turning back to Pettia, to the heat of him. "Come, we have much to discuss." The Eyrie swallowed them, narrow halls, cold, clean light, servants who moved like snow. Lysa took Sansa's hands in hers and squeezed too hard. "You're safe here," she said, smile trembling. "Safer than anywhere. You'll be quiet. You'll be good. There are so many wicked tongues below. They'll try to find you. They won't. I won't let them." "Thank you, my lady," Sansa said. "Not my lady," Lysa said quickly, too quickly. "Aunt, we're family. Families should be close." Her eyes darted to Pettia and back, very close. "Come, come. You must see the moon door so you understand how we keep the Eyrie clean." Sansa's feet went heavy, but she let herself be led. The high hall was a slice of sky on stone, pale pillars, a floor that gleamed like ice. At the center, a round slab of blue-veined marble rested in its frame like a lid on a well. 2 guards stood beside it with faces that had forgotten how to smile. Lysa touched the stone as if it were a pet. "When the world below grows noisy with lies, we open the sky and let the truth fall through." She looked at Sansa as if measuring how far she would drop. "You'll be safe as long as you don't bring the noise with you." "I will be quiet," Sansa said. "Good," Lysa whispered. "Good girl." The days that followed were careful. Sansa learned to be Elaine, to move as if she had always worn brown hair and a plain dress, to speak in a voice a little softer and a little lower, to sit near Lysa's son while he played at Lord with his little soldiers and his big coughs. Sweet Robin clung to his mother and demanded attention like a bell that never stopped ringing. He liked Sansa because she let him win. He disliked the hound because the hound never pretended to be smaller than he was. Pettia flowed through rooms like warm wine, sweet and heavy. He settled himself into the Eyrie the way ivy settles, winding around stones until they forget what they looked like before it grew there. Lysa bloomed under him and burned under him and watched Sansa with a jealousy that had teeth. Twice Sansa found the door to her chamber bolted from the outside and had to knock until a maid came to free her. The maid didn't meet her eyes. News came late to the Vale, riding thin mountain roads on tired wings. The first raven brought what Littlefinger had predicted in half a sentence, inked in a careful hand. Bread and salt laid at the twins. Torches by the dozen. A feast that promised to heal old hurts. The second brought a whisper bent into a question. Stark banners seen on the river, then swallowed by night. The third came with broken wax and a stain that looked like a thumbprint of wine. The phrase had ordered new flags and extra dogs. Dogs? Sansa asked, the word catching in her throat. For the bones, the steward said, then swallowed as if he'd said too much. Feasts are messy, my Lady Elaine. That night the mountain wind howled like an animal that smelled blood. Sansa lay awake and listened to it, and to the scratch of mice in the walls, and to the sound of her own fear, steady as footsteps in a hall. She went to Petyr at dawn and found him looking out a narrow window with his hands clasped as if in prayer. "Send a raven," she said, before she could be made small, "please, to the twins. To Rob, warn him. Tell him to turn away." His face was kind in the way a mask can be kind. "Ravens fly slower than plans," he said. "What would you have me warn him of?" "A feeling, a smell on the wind. A trap," she said. "Even if I'm wrong, let me be wrong in ink." Lysa's voice slid in from the door. "We do not send warnings to wolves. Wolves bite the hand that feeds them. They bring war to doors. That did nothing to them but open. This is a safe place. We do not invite other people's storms." Sansa turned. "He's my brother. He is a banner and a burden," Lysa said. "And if he falls, the world will be quieter for it." Sansa felt the floor tip beneath her, though she knew it was steady. "How can you?" Lysa's eyes went hard. "Because I did not build this nest to shake it every time the north howls. You will be quiet, Elaine. You will be good. Petyr says it is best, and Petyr is always right." Petyr's silence was agreement wrapped in silk. He touched Sansa's shoulder. "Come," he murmured, as if gentleness could change the shape of the word no. "There's nothing for us to do today but breathe and wait." 2 days later, a singer stumbled in from the road with frost on his coat and songs stuck in his throat. In the kitchens, he traded a melody for a bowl and then couldn't stop the rest from spilling. His voice was ragged as he spoke of torches blown out at once, of music turning to screams, of wolves cold in a hall that had salt on the table. Sansa didn't wait to be told to be quiet. She folded in on herself in a cool corridor where no one could see. The mountain wind pushed at the arrow slits, and the Eyrie stood like a proud jaw set against grief, high enough to think itself above consequence. The hound found her sitting on the cold stone. He crouched, joints cracking, and pulled a flask from his belt. "It's bad," he said. He didn't soften it. "It sounds real." She shook her head, because that was all she could do without breaking. He watched her a long moment and then put the flask away. "You lived," he said, more statement than comfort. "So you live." Her hands were still, flat on her knees. "If they're dead," she whispered, "I have to carry them." He nodded once. "Then carry them, but keep your feet under you while you do. This place will open a hole under you if you stand wrong." Far away and below, a hall was being mopped. Higher than Mercy, a woman who called herself Aunt smiled, because the world had grown quieter, and in a tower with windows too narrow for rescue, Sansa Stark, Elaine Stone, learned that safety without love is just another word for a prettier cell. Snow had started to fall in the Vale at first. It was a whisper, small flakes that vanished on the stone before anyone noticed. Then it came in earnest, cloaking the Eyrie's high courtyards and softening the sharp edges of the mountain. To Sansa, it smelled like home, but it didn't feel like it. The Red Wedding was no longer rumor. Servants spoke of it when they thought she couldn't hear, their voices low, their faces pale, Robb Stark, her brother, dead. Catelyn Stark, her mother, dead. Men who had eaten at the same tables, bled on the same fields, dead. All under the Frey's roof, all after bread and salt. She walked the cold halls of the Eyrie like a ghost, the veil on her head, heavy as iron. Every step she took, she felt eyes following Lysa's, sharp with jealousy. Little fingers, sharp with calculation. The guards, sharp with orders they would never have to explain. One evening, Lysa summoned her to the high hall. The moon door was open, the sky beyond it a swirl of white and blue. The wind came in fierce, tugging at Sansa's skirts. Lysa sat on the high seat, sweet Robin curled against her side. "You're sad," Lysa said in a tone that was almost sing-song. "It's making you careless. That's dangerous here." "My family is dead," Sansa said simply. Lysa's mouth tightened. "So is mine. So is Petius. You learn to let go, or you fall." Her gaze flicked to the open door. "We don't need extra noise in this nest, Elaine. You'll be quiet. You'll be good, Petius says so." Petius was beside the throne, one hand resting on the armrest, his eyes unreadable. Sansa stepped forward until her slippers brushed the pale stone rim of the moon door. The wind roared up from the mountains like 1,000 whispers. She thought of the great hall in King's Landing, of Joffrey's smirk freezing as her knife found him. She thought of Tyrion warning her to look for mercy in strange places, of the Hound telling her to keep her eyes open, of Littlefinger handing her tools and chains in the same chest. She turned to Petius. "I will be quiet," she said. "I will be good." The words felt like stones she had to spit out, but only for as long as I must. His smile was slow and deep, a man who had heard the truth even under the lie. "That's all any of us do, my dear." For weeks, she played the role perfectly. Elaine, the obedient daughter. Elaine, the helpful niece. She laughed at Sweet Robin's games, poured Lysa's wine, listened to Peti's careful plans. She walked the Eyrie until she knew every stair, every window, every hidden door. And she waited. One night the snow came heavy, sealing the lower roads. The guards drank themselves warm in the barracks. Petius was away in the solar, speaking with a courier from the Vale lords. Lysa was alone in the high hall, humming to herself as she watched the snow whirl through the moon door. Sansa entered quietly. "Aunt," she said. Lysa turned, her eyes bright. "Elaine, come see, it's beautiful." Sansa stepped closer until she could feel the cold spill in his. For a long moment they stood side by side, the sky yawning open at their feet. Then Lysa's hand twitched toward her arm, whether to hold or to push, Sansa would never know. She stepped back, breaking the moment, and smiled as if nothing had passed between them. "You should rest, Aunt," Sansa said. "It's late," Lysa hesitated, then nodded and let her go. That was how it went. Days folded into weeks, weeks into months. The world outside the mountains kept bleeding and changing, but inside the Eyrie, time froze. And Sansa, no Elaine, learned patience, sharper than any knife. One day, she told herself, the snows would melt, the roads would open, and the wolf who killed the king would walk back into the world, not as prey, but as something the hunters would fear. Until then, she waited in her pretty cell, watching the white world beyond the moon door, and kept her feet under her, because wolves didn't beg. Wolves endured, and she had endured enough to know that was how they won.